I've been exploring how research-based theater can contribute to feminist adult education. Specifically, I have been using MAD theory and arts-based methodologies to help make visible and destabilize the patriarchal underpinnings of psychiatry.
Key points around listening are that, it very much goes in parallel with speech as an interrelational reciprocal practice, which was, of course, fundamental, one of the fundamental basic building blocks of the feminist movement through the consciousness raising groups, and particularly in relation to solidarity practices of listening across difference, and a sort of building through resonance and recognition between the members of the group.
We are free, six-hand, but we are different. And in duethnography, different are very, very important to bring knowledge, not to arrive to a solution, but to create and to explore difference. And in particular, we are using autobiography and poetic writing as a way to a critical reflexivity.
2018, Kathy and I, and Tracy was a part of this as well, and other students and other women curated a multimedia feminist research exhibition, which we called Disobedient Women, Defiance, Resilience, Creativity, and Past and Present. And it was in we cited it in two different galleries in Victoria, one in the center of town and one up at the university to make it accessible to different audiences.
Around the use of self films or as a type of participatory.
I've always been interested in photography, and it's been a full circle for myself from, engaging it just informally and non-formally to now doing it in my formal classes. As part of my doctoral research, I organized a 3-day workshop where one of the days I facilitated a photo voice activity. Part of my research, I was interested in exploring the critical consciousness or awareness of international students regarding social justice issues through their formal and non-formal education, as well as their informal learning at the university, and how they became aware of these issues.
Of participatory photography is a way of sharing voice, sharing story, and we've often used the method in conjunction with things like poetry, painting, dance.
I'm going to talk about the idea of fiction as feminist pedagogy, the idea that reading can be a subversive act. I've always been interested in the idea, not just how we might engage with fictions in our teaching, and how adults, and particularly women and girls, learn from fictions in unmediated contexts, through private reading, through watching film, television, or televised drama, for example.
Even even though we want to bring back those matriarchal values, we also acknowledge that settler colonialism has been and continues to be a gender process. And so a lot of Indigenous feminism is directly responding to the ongoing colonization, particularly areas like missing, murdered, and Indigenous women, child apprehension, things that are still continuing today that disrupt those traditional roles of the women.
We cannot change the history and the context that created these collections when the past was a very exclusive white boys club. So how can we change now? So we have been changing. I have basically been working in 3 steps. In education, of course, pointing out when dealing with the collection and when visiting the museum, pointing out the voids, pointing out the absences, and contextualizing these absences, questioning history.
Kathy and I, along with other colleagues, have been doing research over the years in galleries and museums in different parts of the world. And our analysis was showing this persistent global narrative that placed men at the center of the world's stories. They were the heroes, the doers, the knowers, the artists, and women, well, nothing to see here, so just kindly move along. And the more immediate one, though, and turned on the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, the CBC, to hear the plans for the sesquicentenary of Canadian Federation when all the provinces came together to be Canada. It was going to be 150 years celebration of that. Being framed yet again as a tale of male heroism, blood sports, acts of war, the war of 1812, colonial discovery and conquest that excluded women's resistance to these kinds of narratives and the way in which the country had been made and progressed.
In the contemporary healthcare system, these workers are quite marginalized. They don't get a say in policy. They don't get to make any decisions at all, really, about anything regarding their work, how it's organized, and how people are cared for at home.
You see the series of photographs here, you will try to make a connection between these photos again. What could be the meaning behind these photos of plants and flowers? What does anything have to do with these photos? What are the significances of these photos, right? So this series of photos is actually an abstract representation of another participant's story and experience of Islamophobia, right? So it shows that photography allows us to make meaning and to imagine through representations, symbols, metaphors.
Kind of as a big part of storytelling, the necessity of feeling and inviting people to feel their emotions, and in particular around the climate crisis, there's so much loss. And that's hard to talk about. Emotions have been so gendered.
So the plays that I've written are based on stories of those diagnosed with mental illness. So again, eating disorders and military trauma, 2 separate plays. But my framing of these stories deliberately complicates cut and dry destigmatization and recovery narratives that we tend to hear about in the media.
Participants were mainly women. They had very limited to no experience in using the arts critically or pedagogically, but I was very fascinated by the outcome on how photography gave them the space, the voice, the creativity to make meaning of everyday objects and abstract representations.
Have been so gendered and kind of like we're socialized often to not express emotion, but through art can invite that emotional expression and collectively feeling the loss and grief around ecological destruction. To honor that and then to work from that is really important.
We chose this format for a number of reasons. First, they legitimize and give value to the stories that they tell. They are huge spaces you can enter, and they legitimize and give value. Why would you create a big exhibition on something that didn't matter? So they're plays of force. They shape and mobilize knowledge and identity, who we are, who we were, who we are, who we should be, both wonderfully and problematically, of course. They include a number of aesthetic devices, so they can be both narrative devices, labels, poetry, and also visuals. They reach hundreds of people. which traditional forms of research do not. A feminist exhibition is a form, it's an intimate form of storytelling through aesthetic objects of experience, memory, and consciousness.
The way I enabled engagement was very much by adopting a feminist approach to both the research and the education.
Photos have multiple meanings because they bring out certain aspects of our own identity and our own selves, depending on where we are located in terms of political, cultural, and social environments.
For relational aesthetic, use our experience as citizens and adult educator that visited the museum to interrogate the museum dedicated to women and feminism.
Engagement was very much by adopting a feminist approach to both the research and the education. I was critically reflexive. I found really being responsive to what they're communicating, both with their bodies and their words, meant that my facilitation was better. I made it learner-centered. If someone came in and said, I'm not doing that, I'd say, okay, what is it you like about it? What is it you don't like? And we managed to make pieces in the end. It was participatory, and I tried to make it fun and joyous. And as a result of that, it was safe and it was playful, and it did allow this creative research with so-called vulnerable women.
Participatory photography for me, it's an opportunity to help participants and researchers who may not necessarily be speaking the same languages or coming from the same cultural background, but it's a knowledge generating capacity behind this.
That is, I think, absolutely liberating is a discussion. Like, okay, what's happening here? Gaze is this? Maybe how could we speak back to that? And I think that's where the facilitation, the feminist facilitation, how to bring in voices. How do we think about the critical issues?
Feminists understand it to be a relationship between the domination of women and the domination of nature. Now, in women's surrealist work, we see hybrid creatures made up of animals, plants, and humans, inhabiting their visual and literary texts. And these signify a creative intent to defy boundaries and binary oppositions between species. And this is where the post-humanist theory comes in as a way of reconceiving relations between species and overcoming oppositions that have been created between the human and non-human, the self and other, nature and culture.
Created that clothesline, as Kathy was saying, so that people could put these cards on them. So the number of cards that were, a number of these cards that they pinned to it, actually 320 people left cards at the exhibition site. So what each card has an image, as you can see. So the question was, how did it operate? How did this unsupervised, unmediated space, because we were not there, we only dropped in occasionally. So this space had to do the educating and the speaking. It had to be the messenger and
listening is something like a journey or a bridge between the two, between the listener and the listened to, and that the listener needs to be prepared to change, and that can be risky.
Of course, I've discovered to my research that, you know, this is the power of feminist pedagogy, photography, and the art of meaning making, how it acts as not only just as a tool to raise awareness, but also to allow the space that we normally wouldn't have in our formal education.
Kind of what cultural revitalization has looked like in my family, is this collaboration and bringing back of those traditional knowledges. Indigenous feminism is a response to colonization. So I like this quote: as Indigenous women, we have rich traditions upon which we can rely and from which we can and should draw our sustenance. Incorporating them to the greatest extent possible in our daily lives are keys to self-empowerment and self-determination for Indigenous peoples. Everything is either ait or kul, good or bad, and you have to set your mind, your intention for the day on what is good, letting go of bad thoughts and feelings. So just these principles for Aitshwalwan, having a good mind and heart. So listening, being prepared by understanding the culture of the people you're with, helping, healing. If you do make a mistake, being careful, and then we are all one, and sharing with each other.
All the things that were coming out, there were a lot of them on feminism. And this one in particular that I really loved is an Indigenous woman disconnected from my culture. It was particularly meaningful to come here and see the elements that spoke to feminist Indigenous strengths, promising that I can be part of it too.